Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, when the whole 1D&D process started and the D&D team was all, this is still going to be 5th edition, and all those 5th edition books you own, you'll still be able to use, all that stuff. Naturally, the reaction to this statement, including from yours truly, was, sure. This is going to be 6th edition, or maybe 5.5, in which case, maybe you'll be able to convert your old stuff, but it's definitely just going to be easier to either start over with new books or stick with 5th edition. Then, after Playtest 5, we started to see reversion. The big 3 spell lists were gone, the 3 big class categories were gone, standardized subclass progression was gone, the new spell preparation system was gone. That's just some of the big stuff. At this point, the D&D team said publicly that the design plan always was that they would have 5 playtests of testing for the appetite for bold new design ideas, and then moving on from there. Then at least some of us, yours truly included, were, wait, hold on, I didn't say 6th edition would be a bad thing. And honestly, it is a bit disappointing that, though ultimately it does look like the 2024 Player's Handbook will be adding some much needed polish to 5th edition, it is really going to be 5th edition. Or maybe, I guess, 5.1. I guess you could even say Xanathar's was 5.1, and then Tasha's was 5.2, and now the 2024 Player's Handbook is going to be 5.3. Now, one thing that's been happening alongside 5.3 is a whole boatload of other systems that have been popping up. It's almost like something might have happened early in this year to spawn a bunch of sentiments to move away from D&D. Can't imagine what that was, but if you have any guesses, let me know. So, Matt Mercer is working on a new system. Matt Colville is working on a new system. Kobold Press is working on a new system. These are just some of the big names. Countless smaller creators are working on new systems as well. I've been following the progression of Vagabond from Terran Pounds. I've also been interested in the development of DC20 from the Dungeon Coach. Now, with some of these systems, what we're seeing is straight out departure from D&D. In other cases, it's more like a different version of 5.3, and I have to say, not always an improvement over 5.2. Recently, I was contacted by Alan, who is the Dungeon Coach, and we've been kind of casual internet buddies for quite a while now, and he invited me to a DC20 one-shot and provided me a link to the alpha DC20 release. So I joined Alan, Bob the World Builder, the DM Layer, and one-shot questers in a session 0 where we set up characters. Once we did that, I was on the hook. I opened up the alpha and I just poured through it. I started writing notes, I started analyzing, and just getting more and more excited. Now I'm going to be spending the rest of this video discussing DC20 and previewing it for you. But I should interject now that if this gets you excited too and you want to check it out, there is an affiliate link in my video description, and if you use it, it helps me out. Also, you can use the coupon code DC10, that saves you 10%. But I also want to say this is not a sponsored video, so I have an affiliate link, but I'm not being paid anything to do this video or anything like that. I'm definitely not obligated to do this video. I'm just excited, and I want to share why with you. But what really got me going reading the alpha for DC20 is how all the design fits together like a jigsaw puzzle, and I was able to put the pieces together. And I started looking at the time as I was getting everything written down and doing all the analyzing and going back and rewriting my notes. And it was suddenly 1 a.m. and then 2 a.m. and then 3 a.m. And I kept thinking that there was no point even trying to sleep until I have this puzzle figured out and on the page. So at 6 a.m., I sent Alan my notes and I went to bed. But what I want to do in this video is share with you the design direction of the system and explain why it has me so pumped. Details will need to be ironed out. That's just the way it is with alpha or even beta tests. But Alan has an unlisted video on his channel going over the complete alpha rule set. He calls it a secret video. And if you've bought the alpha, you already have the link to the video. But if you haven't, you're about to see some of it, and I'll be putting in my 2 cents. And I should probably start by saying, yes, I have Alan's permission to share this with you. Now I'm going to be skipping around a bit. I don't want this to be a super long video, and I want to highlight the stuff that really has me hooked. So we have to start with attributes. So in 5th edition, we have 6 ability scores. We all know them: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. I mean, we know what they are, but try asking a D&D player what wisdom is. Well, it's mental resistance, or maybe it's common sense, or maybe it's intuition, being observant, empathetic, your ability to focus, maybe all of these, maybe some of these. Anyways, for all 6 of these, we're going to have an ability score. And that score is not really used for anything, or at least very little. Mainly it's used to determine an ability score bonus that affects ability checks and saves, and maybe weapon attacks or spell attacks. In DC20, abilities are now called attributes. This is what D&D used to call them, by the way. And let's hear what Alan has to say here.
So you have 4 attributes in DC20: might, agility, intelligence, and charisma. The attributes are the modifiers, right? There's not some sort of score that you then convert into a modifier. It's just they are the modifiers. So if you have a might of 3, that is a +3 on all might stuff. Done, right? Might is strength in that way. Agility is dexterity in that way. Intelligence is basically wisdom and intelligence combined into one. It's just overall mental acuity. Smartness and all that kind of stuff. And then awareness, which is usually tied with wisdom and like perceptiveness, that is separated into the skill of awareness and is, we'll talk about that here in a second. And then there's charisma, which is more obvious as well. If you've also noticed, constitution is not one of the stats, because in general, I feel it weird for the constitution to be a attribute, because there's no skills based around constitution. There's no skill checks for constitution. So I've removed it and shared it between agility and might. Your 2 physical stats, if you've noticed between the 4 stats, might and agility are the physical stats. Intelligence and charisma are the mental stats. And it's another double balance. And if you'll notice in the system, a big step back, the system is symmetrical. There's 2 balancing acts to it the whole time: physical, mental, all that kind of stuff, right? And then also another thing with the attributes is you start off at the highest cap you could possibly get to is 3, is the highest attribute cap. And then at level 1, and then at level 5, 10, 15, 20, the attribute cap increases by 1. So at level 5, it goes to 4, then 5, then 6, and at level 20, you have a 7 as the absolute highest cap. So you'd add a +7 to whatever that type of attribute stuff is, right? And that gives a sense of progression to the game. Instead of being able to create a character that starts off with 4 in an attribute and you end at 5, what? No. It's a progression system. And you also get points throughout your leveling experience sprinkled along the way, right? So you're going to get points more often to be able to sprinkle points in. You're also going to be getting skill points with skills. We'll talk about that in a second. And you get talents and features. So you're getting things, not an overloaded amount to where all characters are just broken and too busted, but you get enough stuff to be able to customize your character in the way that you're wanting to, because I think that's a very important thing for me, is a character progression and for you to feel that, right? So there's that. The other thing is there's something called a prime modifier. Your prime modifier is your highest attribute, right? So whenever you make your character, you get your character, there's going to be one stat of your 4 stat attributes that you get. There's going to be one attribute that has a 3 in it, right? One of them is going to have a 3. What's it going to be? Which one of those 4, right? That, whatever your highest attribute is, that is your prime modifier. It represents your character's experience, their ability, their capabilities as an adventurer, and that is how good they are at just overall being an adventurer. And over time, your prime attribute will level up with you because your highest attribute will be leveling up with you, right? So, in a lot of times in combat, whenever stuff hits the fan and you got to fight for your life, you're going to be using your prime attribute. So what that means is when you swing a sword, you use your prime attribute. When you cast a spell, you use your prime attribute. So a good example I've used before is like a fighter or a barbarian. If a fighter and a barbarian, if they want to have might be their main, they put a 3 in might and they're just a super strong and that's how their character goes, sure. And when they swing a sword, yeah, they have a +3 and add their all that kind of stuff, right? In D&D and Pathfinder and stuff, certain weapons they force you into strength, they force you into dexterity, and then if you have low of that, then you're just tough out of luck, right? In DC20, the prime modifier, the prime attribute, if you want to call it that, is this lets you be able to build characters that you would never otherwise be able to build. So this barbarian, for example, a might barbarian, they swing their sword as hard as they can. Yeah, right? Or if you have a dexterity-based fighter, right, and the highest attribute is a dexterity, they're quick and nimble with their sword. What about intelligence? What if you wanted to make a fighter with a high intelligence, and they're just like a Sherlock Holmes mastermind battlefield tactician, right? And they're so smart, they move and they know what to look for. They study their enemy, and they have such a high intelligence, and they're so smart on the battlefield. That's what makes them dangerous, right? So if a fighter has a 3 in intelligence, and that is their highest attribute, is 3, their prime attribute's 3. When they swing their sword, they use their prime attribute of 3. So you're not just absolutely nerfing your fighter into the ground if you choose intelligence as your highest stat. Now, are you going to be more at disadvantage if you get into a grapple, or you have to make an acrobatics check, or something physical based with if your might and agility is low? Yeah, you're going to be in a worse spot than what you would be, because all the skills and all of the attributes are balanced in that way, and they each have a balanced way of what they represent. So if you do focus more on intelligence instead of strength and might, you're going to feel that you're going to have lower health, because strength and dexterity. Might and agility, they are basically what represents your health and being able to do all these physical-based things, right? And then charisma. What if you wanted to put points in charisma and you wanted to be a charismatic barbarian, like a handsome Hercules-type-looking barbarian? You're a leader of the battlefield. You're being able to tell people, watch out, move, get across. And like that's how you represent your strength on the battlefield, right? Now, I don't mean strength is in the might score. I mean just your presence on the battlefield and how good you are at swinging a sword. Just because you are an intelligent or a charismatic based martial class doesn't mean you just suck at swinging a sword, right? Those two, a might based fighter and a charisma based fighter, both practiced at swinging their sword, and they know how to fight in combat. They know how to cast spells, they know how to swing a sword, whatever it is. And that prime attribute lets that be able to be represented by how good they are at it, and it doesn't force someone into being a situation like a paladin, where in a paladin in D&D, you got to have some good strength, you got to have a good constitution so you get your health up, you got to have a good charisma for your spells and stuff. And if you wanted to be an intelligent paladin in D&D, you literally would just be nerfing yourself, and you literally couldn't. And you could not role play that, right? In DC20, you can make an intelligence-based paladin, because your intelligence modifier is going to be how you cast your spells, it's going to be how you swing your sword. Cool. Now, are you going to have less health because you don't have as much agility and strength? Yes, because like I said, all of them are balanced in that way.
So this was the first thing I got really excited about. So here's a character sheet for DC20, and I have my 4 attributes here. So there are a few ways to determine the scores, but the simple method is the standard array. So I get a 3, a 1, a 0, and a -1 to assign. So let's say I'm thinking I want to play an intelligence-based fighter. So then what I want to do is go to intelligence and put my 3 there. Then maybe, I don't know, maybe 1 in my agility, maybe a 0 in might. I don't want to be really weak. And then the -1, I guess, is going to go under charisma. Now I get 1 more point to assign. So I can raise one of these by 1, but not above 3. So I can't assign it to my intelligence. So maybe I'll make my agility 2. And so those are my scores, and now I have my prime attribute up here. And this is equal to my highest ability score, which is 3. So my prime is 3. And for a first level character, your prime is pretty much always going to be 3. Whenever I make an attack with my fighter, my prime attribute is what I use. So I just made an intelligence fighter without sacrificing my ability to make attacks. There's some other sacrifices I am going to have to make, but other benefits I will get. But here's the stuff I love here. So my ability score is my bonus. So that's perfect. If I make an intelligence check, I'm adding +3. If I make a charisma check, I'm subtracting 1. I get to choose what my primary attribute is going to be. I mean, if I want an agility paladin or a might-based sorcerer, the system allows me to do that. The reduction to 4 attributes, I think, also works. When was the last time you saw a published product that calls for the character to make a constitution ability check? What is wisdom and what is intelligence and what is the difference? Well, here it is much better defined. Might is strength and fortitude. Agility is reactions and coordination. Intelligence, that's your smarts, all the smarts. And charisma is your force of personality and your presence. So, I'm a fighter swinging a sword. If my prime attribute is strength, it's like D&D. I'm putting force behind every blow. If my prime attribute was agility, then I'm precise. If it's intelligence, then I'm figuring out my enemy's weaknesses. I'm 2 steps ahead of them. They dodge right, I'll account for that. And if it's charisma, I have all this presence and I'm staring them down and they just don't have the sand to properly fight me, their confidence is shattered. So I come up with the primary attribute, and I can determine the narrative to justify that. Next thing we need to do is assign 2 save masteries, and think of it as save proficiency. They can be any 2 we want. So I'm going to throw 1 on intelligence, and so I fill in this dot right here, and 1 on agility, so I fill in this dot right here, and I am going to get a bonus of +1 on those saving throws. So my agility save is going to be 3, and my intelligence save will be 4. And since I do not have mastery in might or charisma saves, my might save is 0, and my charisma save is -1. Then I get a mental and a physical save, which is the highest of the 2. So my physical save is the higher of my might or agility, so it is 3. And my mental save is the higher of charisma or intelligence, and so it is 4. Now, I ended up talking to Alan quite a bit about his system, and one of the things he asked me about is whether they should bother keeping physical and mental saves. They've already decided to rename them, so the physical saves is currently being called Grit. In fact, it's even referred to as Grit in part of the alpha, and the mental saves is being changed to Will, I believe, if I remember correctly. And the idea is that a saving throw might be might, agility, charisma, or intelligence, or might be a more general save like physical or mental, or grit or will. Now, what I suggested to him is he should get rid of them entirely, which was not what he was hoping, I would say, but here's the thing. As it is right now, there's an obvious optimal move, and that is you're going to put your 3 wherever you want, and then you're going to put your 1 in either physical or mental, whatever the 3 wasn't. Right? So I have an intelligence of 3, that's a mental stat. So my second highest attribute, I want to be a physical stat. And then I choose my highest and second highest as my saving throw masteries. And that's going to give me the best grit and will save possible. But if you just got rid of the physical and mental saves, then you aren't really pressured into where you put your second highest attribute or which ones you choose for mastery. Anyways, I put in my 2 cents and we'll see what happens in the beta. So let's move on to damage, and I like this a lot. So in D&D, you make your attack roll, and you either miss, you hit, or you score a critical hit. Unless you score a critical, it doesn't matter if you hit dead on or by a mile. And then you're going to make a second roll to roll damage, and scoring a critical by no means guarantees doing more damage than a regular hit. Let's see what DC20 does with damage.
Damage in DC20. This is another one of the iconic big keystone things of DC20 that I've never seen a game system do for damage. In DC20, you do not, well, I gotta say this first. In D&D, whenever you roll to hit and you get a 27 to hit, no one cares. No one cares. You roll the 18 on the dice plus whatever, and you get a 27 to hit. So many times, and it literally happened yesterday when I was playing, so many times they're like over 20, and they'll just say over 20 because it literally doesn't matter. And they roll high on the D20, and it doesn't matter because all that matters in D&D is hit or miss, right? That's literally all that matters. Now, obviously, there's a critical strike. Sure, cool. That should be good. That should be cool in an indie game. But it does feel bad that there's a moment at the table where rolling high doesn't matter. No one cares. That feels bad. And then that also can be followed up by another bad feel where you roll a 27 to hit and then you roll your D12 for your damage dice and you roll a 1. Now that's never feel bad. So it's a missed opportunity of a feel good followed by a feel bad. Like, oh, come on. That just feels bad. So in DC20, there are no damage dice. And that might be one of the hottest takes or the biggest thing that's going to be like, oh, wait a second. But please stay with me and think about this. You might not realize the rolling for damage and how good it feels to roll for damage. I don't think a lot of people realize the also bad feels. How many times have we had, guys, the bad feeling of you roll for damage and then, oh man, okay, well that's like I rolled a 2, a 1, and a 3. Okay, and that just feels why it takes longer, and I'll get into it in a second. But basically, in DC20. All of your damage sources have a base damage. That is a flat base damage. You deal that much damage. So if you swing your sword, that's 2 damage. 2 damage. You shoot your firebolt, it's a 2 damage, right? You swing a big 2-handed sword, whoa, 4 damage. Everything has a base damage to it, right? And then here's the part that gets crazy. Your attack roll matters. So if you roll a 27, it matters. Here's why it matters. Every 5 that you beat an enemy's defense by, right? Armor class in DC20 is called defense. Every 5 that you beat their defense by, you add +1 to your damage. So yeah, you might have a 2 base damage, a 2 sword, cool. And you make an attack roll, let's say for simplicity, the armor of this thing you're attacking is a 15, right? So if you roll a 15, you hit, you deal 2 damage. Sweet. How fast is that? Cool. Awesome. Done. But if you roll a 20 to hit and you beat the armor class by 5, right? So 15, you roll a 15, you deal 2 damage. 16, 17, 18, 19, you deal 2 damage. But on a 20, you've dealt 5 more, that you've beat the armor class, you've beat the armor by 5, right? And now you deal 3 damage. And if you get a 25, you deal 4, oh my gosh, right? And so the higher your attack roll, your higher your attack check is, deals more damage, right? And so it always matters. And then it also keeps in mind help action from other people adding into other things, which we'll get to help here next. It all matters how you can get that roll up there, right? And then the other thing is there's a vocabulary to this that makes it also quick and simple at the table as well. If you beat an armor class by 5, that's called a heavy hit. If you beat an armor class by 20, that's called by 10, it's called a brutal hit. So beat it by 5, that's a heavy hit. Beat it by 10, that's a brutal hit. And then it goes beyond that, right? But it's very quick and clean at the table, because if I tell a player, this is, let's see, that's a 16 to hit. And then they say, that's a hit. I know I deal my goblins little 1 damage from their dagger. But if I say 18 to hit, and they go, oof, that's a heavy hit. I'm like, oh, that deals 2 damage, right? Because I added 1. And it's a very clean vocabulary at the table too, because you just say the word heavy, and that means you beat me by 5. You say the word brutal, and that means you beat me by 10. Also, side note, critical strikes. If you get a crit, natural 20 is a +2 damage on top of everything, right? So, boom.
Okay, so one thing I mentioned to Alan is I think he is underselling the damage system here. Like, he mentions that you don't roll for damage in DC20, but hear him out. But you do roll for damage. Your attack roll is also your damage roll. He's combining the 2 rolls into 1. So he's kept the hit-miss mechanic in D&D, and instead of making you roll again to do damage, that attack roll is also the damage roll. Not you hit by 5, so hey, roll for more damage. No, you hit by 5, more damage, no additional roll required. So here's the weapon list, and you'll see this column right here. We have damage. And you'll see that we have different weapon types listed here, and that matters, and we'll get to that. But right now what we see is 1, 2, 3, or 4 damage based on how heavy the weapon is. And then based on the weapon you're using, you're going to get additional properties. So if you're doing a 1 damage weapon, it's going to have the thrown property and be concealable. If you have a 2 damage weapon, it's either going to be thrown or versatile. If you have a 3 damage weapon, it'll be a 2-handed weapon and have reach. And if you have a 4 damage weapon, well, then it deals 4 damage. Now, I really like this, but it's one of the things where I did find a balance issue in the game. 4 is just too much more than 1 because you aren't adding your attribute modifier to the damage. So that's 4 times the damage. Though that it's not really 4 times once we consider doing extra damage. But a little sneak preview into what's happening. Alan is currently testing having the damage cap at 3. I'm not sure how he's handling the versatile property yet, but it goes 1, 2, 2, but with reach, and then 3. Once he finds the sweet spot, this is a fantastic system in my opinion. So now I want to talk about 2 other major mechanics of the game, action points and stacking advantage and disadvantage.
Action points, and in action economy, this is how combat works and what fuels your actions in your turn in combat. And how it works is you have 4 action points and you can spend them to do things. It's as simple as that. And explaining it to new players that are brand new to the hobby, brand new to whatever, TTRPGs, it's very simple to be like, okay, you have 4 action points to do on your turn. What do you want to do? And then they cost usually 1 point each, and then that's it. I want to run over here. Oh, I'm not close enough. I'm going to use another action to move. Okay, now I'm here. I'm going to attack and help the ally next to me. Woo, cool, right? The help action is actually cool in DC20. We'll get to that later. But that is just so much more efficient than having this action, bonus action, reaction, movement. Maybe you can use them, maybe you can't use them, and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just a lot more streamlined. And the certain types of things you can do as far as movement goes. Another little side bonus rule here is in DC20, movement is measured in spaces instead of feet, because we all know whenever you have 30 feet of movement and then you say, how far can I move? Think about new players' perspective. How do I, it's 5 feet. So then 5, 10, 15, 20. And even veteran players have to count out 5, 10, 15, 20. Why? Why would you have to force a conversion for the default method of you counting the number of spaces? So in DC20, you move in spaces. So if you had 30 feet of movement, that would be translated to 6 spaces of movement, right? So you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because that's what you would do whenever you play. And if you ever do need to convert it to feet, you can, in the same way that we've been doing it with the game systems like we have. So that's just a little side thing. But anyway, another unique thing in DC20 is something like the dodge action. Normally that would take your full action to take the dodge action, and it just kind of feels bad to take the dodge action, and there's very niche times when that would be useful, right? And not feel bad. So in DC20, you could spend 2 action points to take a full dodge action. Oh, you fully dodge, you're disadvantaged on all attacks against you for a whole round. Nice. The dodge action you know and love. But if you only wanted to, or you wanted to have a turn, let's say you wanted a turn with 1, 2, 3, you spent 3 and you have 1 point left, and you can't take a full dodge action, you can take a regular dodge action or a minor dodge action, and then you only get disadvantage on the next attack against you instead of all. So there's a very fluid thing that can happen here whenever you can spend, this is a big version or just a smaller version, right? You can do the same thing with attacks. There's certain attacks that you can perform that have multiple action points poured into it to make one huge attack, or you can make just one, right? And your action points are going to be the fluid resource that you use to do that. But the big picture here is reactions. One of the big separating factors here, away even from Pathfinder that has a similar setup. Pathfinder has 3 actions, 1 reaction, right? Once you take that 1 reaction, it's gone, right? And then that's it. In DC20, it works a little bit different, and I think more smooth and engaging, and you'll see. So in DC20, when you have 4 action points, there are things that your character has that could trigger a reaction. But a reaction is not this one floating resource that you can or cannot use. It is an opportunity for you to spend action points. So if an opportunity attack happens, somebody leaves your threatened range, then that would also only marshals can take opportunity attacks in that way. Only marshals are trained quickly enough with their blades that they have out to be able to make those quick reactions like that. Only for marshals. That could trigger a reaction that lets you spend an action point. Cool, right? And if a marshal has something leave their range and they run away from it or whatever, and they make an attack, they spend an action point off of their turn. It's not their turn yet. They spent an action point. Now they only have 3. So they made the opportunity attack, and then once their turn comes back around, now they only have 3 action points. Again, balanced, right? So now they have only 3 action points and they get to do whatever they're doing. They spin, and then cool. Now their turn's over, and as soon as your turn's over, boom, you get all 4 back again.
So 4 action points recovered at the end of your turn, and that's a bit different because usually things are recovered at the start of our turn. But the beauty here is how you have your full pool when you decide whether to take reactions and whatever is left on your turn. In D&D, if you're an optimizer, what you're trying to figure out is how to take exactly 1 reaction every round. And if you don't take a reaction, well then too bad. You just reduced your action economy. DC20 does not penalize you for not taking reactions. What other system does that? You're taking 4 actions every round, one way or another. On to advantage and disadvantage.
The other thing I want to talk about is the 2 balancers, the 2 yin and yang of this action point system. There is a stacking disadvantage mechanic and a stacking advantage mechanic. And the stacking disadvantage mechanic is called the multiple check penalty. Anytime you make a check multiple times, you gain stacking disadvantage. If you attack, right? So yes, you have 4 action points, and a big thing people are worried about is like, oh, so you're telling me at level 1, you can attack 4 times? That's going to slow the game down. Oh my gosh, well, stay with me. There's lots of reasons that speed the game up. But if you make your first attack, yes, you can make 1 attack, you spend an action point, you make an attack, regular attack, cool. If you make a second attack, you could make another attack at disadvantage. You would roll 2 d20s, take the lowest, that's disadvantage, right? If you make a third attack, In the same turn, you would roll 3 d20s and take the lowest. And yes, if you made 4 attacks on a turn, you would roll 4 d20s and take the lowest. And it's very mirrored and simple in that way. And it's also very intuitive because you stacking disadvantage on the same thing, right? Mix it up, cast a spell, grapple. What are you doing? Help an ally, right? It's also incentivizing people to help an ally. Again, help action is cool. I'll get to in a second. But that's how a stacking disadvantage works, so that you probably shouldn't take 4 attacks on a turn. So there's that. And that happens for all checks. Grappling, all that kind of stuff. You can choose, if you try and grapple somebody and they get away from you or they succeed against you, I really want to grapple this guy. You can grapple again, but it's a disadvantage, and that's kind of the constant state of the game. Now, on the other side of that coin, on the advantage side, you have 4 action points. At any time during your turn, you can spend an action point to give yourself advantage on whatever check you're doing. A normal turn, a very standard turn in DC20 could look like this. I use 1 action to move. I run into combat and I get into melee with a creature. I make an attack. I roll 1d20. I make an attack. Okay, cool. And if I wanted to attack again, stay with me here, see if you get the whole big picture of the game. If I wanted to attack again, I could expend another action point to attack, and then I would have disadvantage. I'd have to roll 2 d20s and take the lowest. But if I wanted to spend another action point to give myself advantage, I would cancel out one of those disadvantages, right? So instead of rolling 1 attack with disadvantage, I could spend 2 action points essentially to make an attack, and instead of at disadvantage, now it cancels that out and I make another regular single attack. Or in the case, I've seen this happen one time where a creature's running away, they're going to sound the alarm and alert the camp that the presence of that, and this player, it's their turn. They have got to grapple this freaking goblin. They have got to grab him, and it matters a lot, right? So they're like, I'm going to make a grapple. I'm going to grapple him, and I'm going to give myself advantage 3 times. So yes, in this system, you can make 1 mega grapple if you wanted to. Now, is that an efficient turn? Probably not, but it mattered to that player to grab this goblin, and that was their purpose, and they wanted to put their entire emphasis into this moment. So they took a grapple check and they gave themselves 1, 2, 3 advantages. They rolled 4 d20s, took the highest for their grapple check, and they definitely grappled them, right? And that player was able to fully do what they wanted to do with every ounce of their being. And that's another side benefit of this system, is if you want to do something, you have 4 action points and you can pour those action points into whatever it is you want to do.
So this is really an important detail when you consider the 4 action economy. At first, you might think you may be attacking 4 times, but what's probably more likely is maybe you take a reaction, then on your turn you move, make an attack, do something else, maybe the help action. Or maybe you attack, and attack a second time using 2 actions to offset disadvantage, and you move because you didn't take a reaction. It's really clean. I can tell you in playtesting, I played a fighter, and on most turns I attacked once, sometimes I attacked twice, never attacked 3 times. Okay, those 3 were big, and I needed to talk about them first before covering the elephant in the room. How does DC20 address the martial caster gap? Well, first off, the line between what a martial and a caster is codified in the system, and there is a built-in parity. Casters get cantrips, martials get maneuvers, casters get spells, martials get techniques, casters get mana, martials get stamina.
Mana points. First of all, spell slots are terrible. I don't like spell slots. They don't make sense to me. Mechanically, it's just rough. It's rough. So spells, you get mana. You have mana points. And essentially, if you want to try and convert it to D&D, a level 1 spell in D&D would cost 1 mana. A level 3 spell would cost about 3 mana. And it kind of works like that. And you have a mana pool that has that starts off with a mana of about like 6 or so mana that you'll have, and then you can see the big picture from there. And here's another big part though with mana, and why this is so cool and why mana works in such a cool way, is spells evolve in DC20. So these are called spell enhancements. Basically, you can spend mana to boost a spell that you're casting. So if you have a certain spell that you want to cast, on all spells, at the bottom of each spell is a list of spell enhancements that you can boost each spell with, right? And they can grow and turn into other spells that you're familiar with. So my first example is Firebolt. Firebolt, hit. One thing of fire, I attack it to the person. Done. If you spend mana to boost it, it could turn into Scorching Ray. And 3 beams, boom, 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 hit the target, right? Because you spent mana to boost it. To boost Firebolt into Scorching Ray, you poured mana into that same single spell. And then you could turn that higher levels. You have a ton of mana. You're pouring it all into to create Firestorm, where you have multiple, and they have little small explosions at the bottom of it. Oh my gosh, right? So spells evolve. Just like command. The command spell, I tell you to do this one thing and you do this one thing. Command can evolve into suggestion, and suggestion can evolve into mass suggestion. So you have these spells. So in DC20, there will be less number of spells. In D&D, there's over 300 spells, close to 400 spells. In DC20, there's going to be a third of that, right? Because spells are going to be able to be connected to each other and be condensed into one cool thing. And not only that, spells that are lame and kind of have a weird limited niche spot can actually turn into something more. For example, the Friends cantrip, right? Friends cantrip is you cast friend, charm the person or whatever, but then they know you cast magic once it ended, which is always like this, like, it's the thing that makes people not cast Friends. Well, there is a Friends cantrip. You can freely cast it, but if you want to spend 1 mana to boost it, you can boost it to where now when you cast Friends, that one time you cast Friends with boosting it with 1 mana, now they don't know that magic was affected on them, and it takes that part out of the spell. It modifies it. It boosts it. You pour more mana into it. You can do it on 2 people at the same time. You pour more mana into it. You see what I'm saying? The last example is the Light cantrip. The Light cantrip, I cast light on this pencil. Cool. It's a light source now. Super simple. What if I poured mana into it? What could it do? And I almost challenge you right now. Like, what could it do? What are the possibilities? What can I add? What could boost? You know what I'm saying? So now this light cantrip that has a pencil, this object in your hand that has light on it, I spend 1 mana, flashbang. This big blinding flash of light happens, and then now there's a physical save against being blinded, right? Boom, done. And so cantrips and spells that have these limited pocket things can be combined in big ways and parts of things to be able to make it just make sense and combine them together. So that is another thing of how spells work. Also, something like Fireball. Something like Fireball, the baby version of Fireball would be a little 2x2 space on the map, and that's the little thing. It's a small version of it, right? And then as you pour more mana into it, it gets bigger and bigger. Adds a burning condition where people catch on fire. It adds a range, but you can also customize it based on what you need. If you're in a small space, maybe you don't want to spend mana to increase the radius of the fireball. Maybe instead you want to spend mana to increase the potency of the fireball. Or maybe there's a huge battlefield, there's a huge cluster of enemies, so you want to spend, you could cast fireball here this big, but then you want to spend more mana to increase the radius, so you can truly customize spells and how you want to use them, which is going to be, it's just so much fun for casters to be able to do.
So sounds good, right? Every spell you have can be customized by enhancing it. Every spell is like multiple spells in D&D. Well, then that means less to track, smaller list on your sheet to choose from, keeps the thematics of your caster on point, but let's see how it looks. So here is Sacred Bolt. Okay, so you cast this cantrip, costs you 1 action point, 10 spaces, and you get 2 choices. Either you make a creature within range glow with light for 10 minutes, or you can use the cantrip to attack, and if you hit, they take 1 point of damage. Now, just like with a weapon, if you hit by 5, you do 2 points. If you hit by 10, you do 3 points. If you score a critical, you'll do 2 additional points. Then you have a cantrip passive. So passives in DC20s are things that don't require action points or mana. They're just freebies. So if the enemy is undead or exposed, you do 1 more damage. And just like any attack roll, the damage roll is built in. So you hit an enemy, you do 1 damage. They're undead, 2 damage, you hit by 5, 3 damage, and so on. And you'll see here we have some ways to enhance this with action points. Now, cantrips sometimes are enhanced with action points instead of mana, and what's really nice here is, let's say you're playing a low-level character, and so you got your 6 mana, and you're been casting those nice spells, and it goes down and down and down, and maybe you're out of mana, or you're trying to save your mana. Well, action points are something you will always have. You're always going to have 4 action points, and you can spend additional action points into making your spells better. So here we can spend an action point and increase our damage by 1, or spend an action point and increase our range by 5 spaces. And you can do these more than once. So you could cast Secret Bolt and then spend all 3 of your action points to add 3 additional damage. So you get that big hit. Another thing you can do here is Guiding Bolt. It requires 1 action point. So the target makes a save, and if they fail, they become exposed, which is a special condition in DC20, where attacks against it have advantage. Well, then what I could do is I could do my action point to cast Sacred Bolt, enhance it with Guiding Bolt, so I spent 2 action points, and now that creature is hit, and now they're exposed, so I could cast Sacred Bolt at them again, but because they're exposed, it's going to cancel out that disadvantage for attacking a second time, or casting a spell a second time because of the stacking disadvantage mechanic. So there's a synergy in what you can do with this spell by spending action points. It's all built in. So now let's look at a non-cantrip. So here's Heal. 2 action points and a mana point. 10 spaces of range, and you make a DC 10 spell check. And like with an attack, where one roll includes a damage roll, here the roll includes the healing roll. So 3 healed on a success, and 1 more for every 5 you succeed by. Roll an at 20, and you get +2 more. And get this, if you fail, you still heal 2 points. And in D&D, of course, Healing Word and Cure Wounds. One is a touch spell, but heals more damage. The other is a range spell, but heals less. Well, it's built in here. If you're touching a target, add 1 point of healing. It is efficient. Spend 1 more point of mana, and you reduce the action point cost to 1. Spend a mana point to improve the amount healed by 3. Spend a bunch of mana, heal a bunch of hit points. Okay, so if that sounds cool, here's how marshals work.
Stamina is a way different energy source than mana. How stamina works is it's a much smaller pool. At level 1, you have literally 1 stamina. And at level 10, I think you have like 5 or 6 stamina, right? Depending on your class. So you have a very small pool of this stamina. So let's say, for the sake of example, you have 2 stamina. And with your stamina system, you're going to be spending it and gaining it back during combat. There's going to be things that happen during combat that gain stamina, and things that happen during combat that cause you to spend stamina. So it's a dynamic energy source where you're spending it and losing it, spending it and losing it, and you're constantly doing this, as opposed to mana that you just spend it and then eventually runs out. You got to take a long rest, get it back, right? It's dynamic, and it's also custom fit to each class. So different classes regain stamina in different ways in a class feel, really hitting the class fantasy out of the park. In the same way that spellcasters cast spells differently to make them feel unique and different within each other. Marshals each have a different way. So for example, barbarians regain stamina by getting hit hard or hitting hard. If they take a big, huge hit. If they take a heavy hit or higher, they gain a stamina. If they deal a heavy hit, they gain a stamina, right? So that's the feel of the barbarian, right? And it feels right for the class. Rangers, if they find a hidden creature by taking a search action, they find some creature that was hidden, they gain a stamina. They're a hunter, they're a searcher, they find things. Or if they hit their hunter's mark, they mark a target and they have a hunter's mark on them, and they attack their prey, the thing they're hunting, they gain a stamina, right? And every class regains stamina in these different ways. So I could go on to all the rest of them, but and I love talking about that type of stuff, but that's stamina. Marshals. In D&D, the coolest martial class, right? The one that that's how it should be, is the Battlemaster Fighter. And I had a rework for the Battlemaster Fighter where I reworked the whole fighter class and gave the entire fighter class the Battlemaster situation, where you have this martial die and you can spend it and do stuff with it, right? Because I thought maneuvers are so cool. Why is it gated to one class's subclass, right? No. So in DC20, all marshals have access to what are called maneuvers, right? And how these maneuvers work is you spend additional action points to boost your attacks. So, for example, you have 4 action points, right? You spend an action to attack, right? Now, you have a list of maneuvers that you can take. I'll talk about them here in a second. You have a list of maneuvers that you can take to add additional effects to this attack you made, right? So you made that one attack, and you can spend an additional action point to add +1 damage to it. Ooh, you're really making a power attack there. Or you could spend an extra action point to add the reach property. You're really lunging forward and extending your arm out there to temporarily, for this one attack, spend an action point to add reach. You could spend an action point to add a cleaving effect where you also deal partial damage to an enemy that's adjacent to your enemy, actually being able to make a sweeping attack across them. You want to add a prone effect? All marshals can add a prone effect. They spend an action point to add a prone effect to the attack that they make, right? So it'd be a dynamic attack save. You make an attack, they make a save, and you could do that. And you could add a pushback, a shove. There's so many different things that you can add in to these effects by. You can to give disadvantage to the target's next attack and impair them in a certain way, right? So maneuvers are, you spend an action point and you can spend additional action points to boost that maneuver, to perform a maneuver, right? So this means you could make an attack and you could add +1 damage to it, add a check to being prone, and also you could give yourself advantage on that, right? You give yourself advantage on the attack. Done. And you see the whole picture of this whole thing kind of combining together and all these different systems overlapping into one meshed system. And then there's an expansion to this of techniques. Marshals have maneuvers and techniques. Spellcasters have cantrips and spells. So in the same way, again, mirrors. Spellcasters have cantrips that they can do for free. Marshals have maneuvers that they can do for free. Spellcasters have spells that cost mana. Marshals have techniques that cost stamina. Balance, mirrors, right? So techniques are things you can spend stamina on to perform big, huge feats of strength in some way. So early in a barbarian, a level 1, a technique might be a barbarian like bang, knocking somebody back 3, 4, 5 spaces, like flying through the air, right? Hitting into a wall. Oh my gosh. A big, huge jump into the air with a big jump attack. Boom. That is a technique, right? And you're actually able to do that with martial classes to be able to do these things. And you have a technique list and you choose a technique just like you have a little list and you choose a spell. You're not going to have as many. It's going to be very much more limited and you're going to have to be tactful as far as what types of techniques that you have practiced to be able to do as a marshal, as opposed to spellcasters who have a bunch of spells. But that's a super fun thing to do. And then at the bigger levels, a barbarian can like smash the ground and create a crater and all this other kind of stuff. So at higher levels. But techniques add a really cool thing for marshals as well.
Okay, so when we talk about marshals, we're also talking about weapons. And let me show you how weapon types are differentiated. So it's not like you're using a longsword or a battle axe. They're both D8 weapons with a D10 versatile. They both do slashing damage, and there's not really a difference. Every weapon in DC20, every weapon is different. So let's assume we have a sword and an axe. They do the same damage, same properties. Here's how they're still different. So our axe has a special maneuver. We use an action point to make an attack, and then we use a second action point to apply the axe maneuver. And all the special weapon maneuvers require an action point. This lets you deal +1 damage, and the target makes a saving throw or gets the bleeding effect where they take a damage point at the start of their turn. Now we could already use an action point to add a point of damage, and we can still do that. So we could spend 3 action points, 1 to attack, 1 for +1 damage, and 1 for this maneuver. But this is better than just adding the +1 damage. It has 1 additional effect, so it is the benefit for using an axe. We also have a passive benefit where we do +1 damage against a bleeding target. So there is synergy with what we can already do. But our sword gives us a maneuver that adds +5 to our attack roll. So that's +1 damage if our unmodified roll would have a hit anyways, or potentially turns a miss into a regular hit. So it is an added benefit and clean. And the passive is +1 damage when we attack the same creature more than once or if they're attacking us. So kind of giving us that narrative of sword dueling a single opponent. So that axe and sword are different. Nice. And Alan talked about stamina points and techniques. So here's the technique my character had, Heroic Leap. You get more techniques as you go up in levels, but at level 1 you pick 1. So if I spend an action point and a stamina point, I gain movement up to my speed, increase my jump distance by 1, make an attack against an enemy in range, and they make a saving throw or fall prone. So I can look at this and I can break down the value in actions. Attack, 1 action. Move, 1 action. Save or fall prone, 1 action. So here's a little peek behind the curtain. Guess what Alan told me stamina points were considered to be worth when designing this stuff? Right, 2 actions. 1 action point, 1 stamina point worth 2 more, and we get approximately 3 actions worth of stuff in a single technique. And you can go through every technique and it is super clear how they've been balanced against each other. So it's not like the Battlemaster Fighter where we have precision attack, which is great, and we have evasive footwork, which isn't. All these techniques give different combinations of benefits, but they're all worth the same, about 3 actions. Okay, so here's another peek under the hood about the conversation I had with Alan, and part of what I discovered by doing an analysis. There is still some work to be done on class balance. Like a deep dive into martials, and I could see how fighters and barbarians and paladins, which are kind of a hybrid of caster and martial, but mainly martial, and rogues were balanced against each other. But rangers fell a bit behind. And behind the ranger, the warlord was looking pretty rough, and behind the warlord, the monk. The poor monk. Ellen and I had a good talk about these things, and I'm expecting to see a lot of this addressed in the beta. There's also little things like there was a weird interaction between the bow passive and half cover, stuff like that. But the bones, like the skeleton of this system, are the basics for what would make 6th edition in D&D. That is, in my opinion, a huge improvement over 5th. Now, I could make this a super long video. I could talk about initiative and how characters can die, and how that prevents the yo-yo of up and down in combat and makes combat healing more impactful, and multiclassing, which is so much cleaner. But I guess I'll finish up by saying I'll probably talk more about DC20 in the future, so eventually I'll probably get to all of it. But if you want to see more right now, then go ahead and hit the affiliate link in the video description, and don't forget to use that DC10 coupon code to save 10%. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.